Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel, The Power of Companies to Change Their Territories. We are very happy to join you this morning and to have the pleasure to share the floor with this group of experts. I will tell you in a minute who is here with me, and we invite you to have an open conversation on this issue that could embrace a few tensions and controversies, and we want to do it with a very open perspective and wide perspective from different territories, different cultural backgrounds, and of course with you, with your background and with the environment and context that you come from. Can I have maybe the PowerPoint presentation? Let me tell you that we have invited a group of experts. The people that is sharing here the panel is totally rooted in the reality of the relationship between companies and territories. Their work is totally directly related with understanding and reflecting on this relationship, and so we will have the chance to have them here with the highest reflections from their daily activities. So here we will have the chance to listen to Professor Frank VANCLAY. He's from University of Groningen, the Netherlands. He will frame conceptually our conversation, and then we will have two business cases. One of them is from Colombia. Thank you, María Claudia TRUCCO. She's the director from Fundación Surtigas in Barranquilla and Cartagena de Indias in the Caribbean, the Colombian Caribbean. And we will listen to a video from Carolina Proaño. She's from Fundación Futuro from Ecuador. And unfortunately, due to the political crisis, their plane didn't leave Ecuador, so she sent a video. So we will have the chance to listen to her case as well. And then we will have a public sector perspective of this issue. And we have the honor to have here with us the CEO of the Environment and Energy Management Agency in France, Mr. Leroy. So, this is the panel, and let me tell you that, as I mentioned before, we could frame this issue the other way around or upside down, maybe thinking that we will have the chance to think as well that maybe territories can also change and influence their companies. So the main question and our invitation for today is to think about how can companies can affect and change territories, and how territories can affect companies. And we want to put some filters here, and we want to understand this issue through thinking about, as I said before, different geographical contexts, because maybe the answer will vary if we understand and we try to think about this relationship from different settings and context scenarios. And then we will also think about this issue considering what's the role of a state and how responsibilities are shared among businesses, communities, and public sector. And thirdly, we will also have the chance to think about territories in which there are opposition or opposite groups to the business sector. So I will leave this short introduction to give the floor to Professor Frank VANCLAY. He is a professor of cultural geography as I told you before, in the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and he's the director of Urban and Regional Studies. So welcome, Professor Frank VANCLAY. The floor is yours.
Can I have my PowerPoint, please? Hello, can I have my PowerPoint, please? So yesterday we had a fantastic inspirational address. And one of the key messages of that address is we should break the rules. Unfortunately, trust an academic to spoil a good story. Breaking the rules is perhaps a good idea when we're thinking about the things that limit how we think or limit our awareness of options. But it's not a good idea in terms of issues around how business operates and its relationship with communities. When in the situation of business and communities, breaking the rules usually means corruption and conflict. However, the rules are not exactly adequate either. They're not always effective, they're not always known, they don't always work, they're not always complied with, and they're rarely adequately enforced. So lots of problems. Another issue is there's lots of rules. There's rules at the level of national state, at the host country and the home country. There are various international standards. There are various corporate standards. There are rules or guidelines at the level of the umbrella organizations of industry bodies at the international level. Financial institutions that lend money for projects have rules. And another set of rules actually is what NGOs expect and what local communities expect. In fact, what local communities expect can be termed the social license to operate. If you haven't heard this concept before, it simply means the acceptance or acceptability of a project to local communities. So here's some of the international standards that exist, lots of them. Actually, despite the vast number of standards that exist, essentially they're all saying the same thing. And perhaps the most important of these is the 2011 United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. It has really changed how we understand the role of business, and it has really provided a strong basis for holding companies to account for their interactions with communities. Now, the World Bank for a long time had its social safeguard standards, which were sometimes held up as a model. They've recently been replaced with the environmental and social framework, the environmental and social sustainability principles. But of course, strictly speaking, they only apply to projects that are World Bank funded. The IFC, however, the International Finance Corporation, that's the private sector arm of the World Bank. And its performance standards are in a way more important because those performance standards have been endorsed by the Equator Principles. Now, the Equator Principles is the sustainability framework for the whole of the finance industry. So anytime a project borrows money, even from private sector banks, arguably the Equator Principles should apply, and arguably that means the IFC performance standards should apply. So the IFC performance standards are also the default action that most environmental consulting companies would use and that most big companies, corporations, would accept were reasonable. And furthermore, they're what NGOs also accept is what is reasonable. So our understanding of how companies should behave and how they should manage their impacts and how they should relate to communities is fairly well established. However, if we look at many places around the world, whether it's mining in South America, even the gas extraction in Groningen in the Netherlands, or dams in Georgia, or oil development in Uganda, or any other project in many other places of the world, we don't see happy communities. We see communities fighting for their rights, to protect their livelihoods, to ensure their way of living and their culture. It's a contradiction. So why is this? In fact, even for projects we would hope would be good projects, wind farms, solar farms, they too create resistance and protest, and they too create many social impacts. In fact, land take and the displacement of people and the subsequent destruction of their livelihoods and their culture is typical to many projects. And one of the inadvertent aspects of all projects is that it creates division in communities. It creates people who benefit from the project and people who don't benefit from the project. Economic development invariably means local area inflation. So every project always creates social, economic, and other forms of harm to communities which need to be effectively considered and properly managed. In fact, we've heard some wonderful stories about RED projects here. Even RED projects are often contested by local communities, with people saying that they are taking their land away from them and they are destroying their livelihoods. With one of my PhD students, we've been studying the forms of protest, and we've identified more than 200 different ways in which communities protest against projects. And understanding the forms of protest is quite important, not so that companies can learn how to resist those particular forms of protest, but to create a realization that companies should not be there in the first place. Major protest action doesn't happen without lots of precursors. And if companies would listen much more and think about the social impacts that they're creating, they wouldn't be in the situation where major protests were happening. Actually, projects are severely affected by, companies are severely affected by protest. They're affected in lots of different ways. They're affected in terms of real cost. All protest actually translates into real cost for business. And that means that there's actually a strong business case for managing social relations and interactions with communities properly. Now, it's quite tempting sometimes for people in companies to dismiss the views of protesters as simply a NIMBY reaction, not in my backyard, something that we don't want. And in fact, a lot of attention is often given to deriding people who are protesters. They're just NIMBYists, and we don't need to take their point of view seriously. They're only defending their narrow self-interest. They should take a bigger view on this. And company staff often think that because of this NIMBY attitude, they don't really need to worry about what the concern is. Well, I think that's the wrong way to view the interaction with communities. Much more important, much better, much more effective would be to think, how can we get a PIMBY or a YIMBY reaction? How could we have yes in my backyard or please in my backyard? So what would it take to go from NIMBY to PIMBY or YIMBY? Well, obviously, business management knows that all organizations need to listen to their stakeholders. But actually, you've got to do much more than that. Going from NIMBY to PIMBY means treating communities with respect. It means implementing genuine and effective community engagement processes. It means demonstrating the social value of the project. There's got to be real value in the project to the local community. It's not just about making money. There's got to be benefits to the local community. To compensate for the harm created, there must be some sort of benefit flow to get that social license to operate. the company must commit to and implement proper environmental and social management to ensure that there's no harm created. To do that, they need an adequate number of sufficiently trained and qualified and resourced social staff, people who can engage effectively with communities. Companies need to be fair and to act in good faith. Companies need to empower communities and assist communities to develop. They need to be a part of the community, to be vested in the community. They need to ensure transparency and accountability, and they need to ensure that there's broad community support for the project before, during, and after the project. So actually all of this is the concept of shared value. The business of business is no longer business. The business of business is to deliver shared value to community and company alike. And there's a whole philosophy about what that means and how it is implemented. A key component of shared value is delivering benefits. So there's a concept called benefit sharing and how that works. Shared benefit sharing or shared benefits are of two forms. There's non-financial and financial forms. Many of the non-financial forms have been talked about at this conference already. And some things are very obvious. The project should provide jobs for local people. But actually, local content and local procurement would deliver much more economic value to local communities than simply a few jobs. Companies can provide training, mentoring, and other forms of support to ensure that local people can apply for the jobs, to ensure that local people can apply for the contracts to service the company, the project. Project infrastructure can be modified to deliver a benefit to the local community. So instead of having a company-only airport, why not make the airport that might be built available to the local community as well? Instead of providing a bridge just for company traffic, why not allow part of the bridge to be for local people as well? Making project equipment useful to local communities. Big projects, mines and so on, they have lots of big equipment that often local authorities don't have. So being able to provide the big equipment to the local community can be a huge contribution to the local community. All sorts of good neighbour and good community citizen initiatives can be implemented. The company should participate in area development schemes, working with local authorities to contribute to the development of the region. And it can provide improved public services, healthcare, education, and so on. Now, that's the easy part. Let's talk about real partnering with communities. Real partnering with communities is about having financial sharing arrangements. It's about saying, maybe we should consider providing a percentage share of project revenue to the local community. Maybe we should be establishing a community development fund. What about equity sharing in any project-created enterprises? What about agreeing to pay special taxes to the local authorities? What about providing free or discounted utility to local communities? And what about allocating real ownership to local communities? That's a sure way to have a real partnership and to get a social license to operate. Of course, all of these are controversial and the implementation is complex, so each one of these could be a PhD topic in themselves, but they are worth thinking about. So what does all this mean for territory? Well, shared value clearly means that companies are expected to contribute to communities. You're not there just to take the resources and run away. You're there to make a long-lasting benefit that extends beyond the life of the project. All international standards require that projects contribute positively to communities. And benefit sharing is fully expected by communities and NGOs and is necessary for companies to get their social license to operate. So, companies must obey the rules. They must not usurp the role of government. It's not the job of government, it's not the job of companies to do the things that governments should be providing. So there needs to be a careful negotiation about how that takes place. All projects that are initiated and all livelihood restoration programs that are established and all community development programs that are established, the sustainability or durability of the program beyond the continued support of the project needs to be carefully considered. There's a lot of research into how that's being done. Effective partnerships are fully needed. Some things to think about.
Thank you so much, Professor VANCLAY, for this inspiring talk. And now I want to tell you that we set up a contest for this conference, and we received 20 cases from different countries in Latin America. And finally, we selected 2. So let me present to you and introduce you to Ms. Claudia TRUCCO. She is the director of Fundación Surtigas in Colombia. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the World Forum members and you attendees for the huge opportunities to share this project. Empowering Youth in Territories aims to create platforms for discussion, dialogues, decision-making, and creating new narratives in the territories. Let me see here. I represent the company Surtigas, which is a leading company for gas distribution in the north part of Colombia. We attend 5 departments and have more than 750,000 clients in 177 towns. The process I'm going to share, we have several goals. First of all, to strengthen leadership and skill abilities for advocacy, social control, participation, and the role of young people as subjects of rights. Professor was speaking of rights. Develop with the youth agenda associated with different actors so that we can boost all of the programs the youth has in advocacy scenarios. Also, to create platforms for these advocacy situations they have to do, and to generate social capital by strengthening and promoting the creation of grassroots organizations. Also, youth organizations and local action boards that are constituted in our country, especially to strengthen democracy. And to give you a context, Colombia has 45 million of inhabitants, 12 million of young people in between 18 and 30 years old. And just the 1% to 2% of these young people vote or participate in all of the democratic scenarios we have. So the context is Surtigas is a Colombian company in a territory that we're going to be there forever, hopefully. And we work as a company that feels co-responsibility to the territory. And that's why we have a private social investment programs through the foundation. Additional to all the sustainable social work we do, we have a foundation, and we work with youth and closing the gap between rural and urban population, and trying to work for the effective enjoyment of their rights. We started in 2008 in Córdoba, one of the departments. 2013, we went to another department, and we were working all of the strengthening of the capacity of the organizations of youth, also in communication for social change, and the appropriation of dialogues spaces for youth to be there, giving and hearing their voice, making their voice heard, and also collaborative work. In 2016, Colombia signed the peace agreement, and that changed the scenario, that changed the territory. So we we were analyzing what happened with the treaty, and we found out that all of the minorities were consulted, but there was no role or no active protagonism for youth that were the victims in the war. And now they had to go into the territories, or they had for the first time new opportunities in the territories. So with this big group, with huge group of youngsters, we decided to take this strategy to a regional level. And they made these proposals and these agendas that included their perspective of how they could contribute to peace building in the territories. And in Colombia's constitution, we have 200 participating scenarios in the democracy, and the peace treatment added 80 more. So you imagine the confusion of where and how to participate. So we decided to go with one of them. It's called the PEDET, which is the Development Plans with Territorial Approach. Colombia designed 16 regions in which poverty, violence, illicit crops, and absence of the state were critical. So the youngsters went to the PEDET and were participating, and we vinculated more youngsters around these territories to participate in this specific scenario that for the government is very important. The company of Surtigas, the area we attend has 4 of these PEDETs. We're actually working in 2 of them, one very strong. So after we started and we changed, because working with communities means we have to be changing very fast to what is happening. The public outreach, the political incidents, the networking, and the social control, and the citizen culture, we went stronger in that skills in working. And today, the youngsters of our territory are working for peace in the territories, specifically in reconciliation and institutional strengthening. Who participated? Obviously youth with the different organizations. Some of them were there, some of them we helped to create. Civil society, we have the help of 2 international organizations. Local governments, specifically with mayors and governors. And as a company, we were the only company participating. It seems for most of the companies like a not safe place to be. But we believe that we do have to be there, because there is where, from those scenarios, we can make different and very important changes. The methodology included a partnership and long-term approach with their vision, how they prioritize their problems and how they want to solve them. Strengthening of youth social base, training in citizen skills, entrepreneurship, and communication. Because these groups have lots of characteristics of movements, so it was important so that they know how to take their voice into these spaces. Also, the generation of dialogues for incidents. We promoted public and formal dialogues with the candidates of all of the towns. Specifically, this end of month, we're going to have the elections, and this group of youngsters have been able to sit all of the candidates and give their perspective and assure with public signing of them that they will include the perspective of youth in their government plans. Also, the articulation of regional youth associations. We promote gatherings, meetings, exchange, that they make bigger their network. And we enhance youth agendas in some agendas at the regions that the youth is not included. So we facilitate it. And the outreach and consolidation, we're always aware, and we're known in the communities that we support any of these ideas, any of these initiatives they do have. We've had, fortunately, very good results in participation, more than 4,000 people working hard permanently, reactivation of 12 youth platforms. There is a youth law that gives them this instance of democracy, and so we've reactivated some of them. The network, it's been networking is very important, and today we have two big networks, one for each department. A department has several towns for explaining. The public outreach, they've created 12 local agendas, one regional agenda, the 32 dialogues with public policy that I was telling of how they dialogued, and creating social capital. We have 2 social entrepreneurships that today they conform themselves, and now they're working for us, helping us replicate, because the youth cycle is very short, so that makes us to start again with new population. Fortunately, as adults, they will be still participating. And political incidents in these organizations, I said the development plan with territorial approach, they are working and they are recognized as youth in this only vedette that is calling. And we continue working with the youth citizenships laws for them to know what they are, what their rights are, and how they should work with it. They're doing social control. They were able to report and to, before the prosecutor's office who were the mayors that were not doing well things. And they actually go by themselves and do all of this, citizen control. And we continue doing all of the territorial approach, helping them with other agendas that are happening in this territory. But why is this strategic to a company like us? Well, first of all, because we maintain dialogues with grassroots communities. That helps us prevent, identify risk, and prevent risk. And especially, it helps us align business to territorial agendas. Also, we identify and we relate to key actors and true leaders, that they will be taking decisions of the territory permanently. Also, we promote new groups of leaders, because it's important that in a community we have several voices. Sometimes you come to communities where there's only one, and usually they're not always representative of all of the population. We build long-term and close relationships, and this is very good for the continuity of the business. They know we'll be there forever, taking them the gas. We contribute to the creations of conditions for democracy, and we want people to vote free and well-informed. And when I want to emphasize in the word free, because when you're in conditions of poverty or violence, making these kinds of decisions, it's very difficult. So we help them to understand what's their power. We strengthen public institutions. We work with them, and definitely that's the foundation for competitive business, strong institutions. We assure companies' interest is not against community and territory interest. And that's something we have to change every day. And especially working with social capital facilitates all of the conflict resolutions process that the company can have and probably will have during all of the continuity of the business. In conclusions, public policy is what connects people to territories so that they can access their rights and strengthen the democracy, and to guarantee that they appropriate and they get empowered. It is key to definitely include them in all of the exercises of identifying the problems, agreeing in the solutions and in the strategies that we are going to take. Our role as private sector is to support and facilitate the process. And you have to understand that when you have in a country like ours, a young woman speaking of the rights she has, that is very difficult because they can be easily tagged as members of the guerrilla or as dangerous for society. So here we are as a company being their backup, opening their doors so that all the community understand that they're responding to a well-done process, accompanied with the institutionality, with private sector. So that's an important role, and it makes and it gives them this barrier of security, because the articulation obviously not only broadens social benefits, but it generates safe environments in the exercise of communitarian leadership, especially as this barrier in countries like ours that we have been affected, the leaders have been affected in all of this process. In our group of 4,000 youngsters, 4 of the leaders have been men with threats, and we've been there helping them. And in Colombia, in this year, we've had more than 177 killing of social leaders. So it's very scary, but it's very important. We have young, encouraged young people trying and doing the change. So I invite you to empower youngsters. Empower them, because actually they are making change in our community. Merci. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Claudia, and thank you for bringing us a story of a company that is committed into building capacity for policy making and for democracy, which is something that maybe is related with characteristics of the territory, and we will continue discussing this issue this morning together with you. And now let me leave the floor, and I will introduce you to Mr. Andrew Leroy. He is the president and CEO of ADEME. This is the Environmental and Energy Management Agency in France. Mr. Leroy, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot for the invite, first. It will be slightly different. I will bring back our discussion to Europe and mostly in France. Just a few comments on what we saw, basically. Maybe to precise as well what is really ADEME. ADEME is let's say, a focal point to organize the transition in this country for the ecological transition. So we are dealing with mobility, food issue, like sustainable food, energy, as you said, waste. So we are speaking about circular economy nowadays, not anymore about waste. We are looking at new resources. We are speaking about housing, and we are speaking about democracy. Empowerment, which is a key issue, and if you want to bring and embark people in the transition, you need to empower people. And you mentioned this, and I really like the PIMB approach, because in all democracy as we are in Europe, and I think we share a number of common points between Netherlands and in France, it's, you know, enterprises have signed their territory, especially here in the north of France. We are a former big industrial land and coal mining land. So you've got people, you've got generations of people being really like tattooed by the past of the territory. And if you want to build transition, it's what we try to do with my team and with the Rev 3 approach that maybe will be more explained this afternoon. It's okay, we've got this past. How do you deal with the past? Basically with liability of companies, especially in certain parts of the world and in France as well. For centuries and decades, we had one main industries with a mine. If you go a bit south of Lille, you will see that the landscape, everything has been really transformed by this industry, by companies. So today, how you change this, how you give confidence as well to the people. So okay, it's my future, you've got health issues sometimes, based on certain type of economies, people were sick or handicapped, so you have to deal with it, and with souvenir of it. So we are far from the problem you may have in Colombia, in Ecuador, or in Latin America at the moment, but you are in the same situation when you look at the mining problems, you've got agricultural issues, like big companies would try to really product in South America to export in the rest of the world. So you've got this issue maybe coming for the next decade, and maybe your gas extracting point. You saw the pictures of Groningen. Gas has been a really good, let's say, commodity for Netherlands for decades, and today we see people which are not, let's say, in favor anymore of gas or natural gas. They want to get more non-fossil fuel energy. They don't want to bring back the CO2 within the cave that we've got available for since the gas extraction. So we are really at the cornerstone of this situation in Europe and in France, and particularly in this part of France. The transition, the way we have to build it and the way we have to build acceptability, the power we give to the young, let's say, the will we give to the young as well. We've got debate and there is many young people there. Few students, I assume. We see something really interesting in France at the moment. You've got a huge, big, not demonstration, but signature. People are doing this big stuff. I don't know the English word for it. Petition, a petition. Yeah, it's petition in English. To say, okay, we are engineers, students in a number of fields, and we don't want to work for these type of companies, and you've got a list of companies. And it's not a tiny issue. It touches like thousands of students, and it scares many of the big firms in France. So, okay, will we be able to really recruit tomorrow and to give, a future for the company? Because if you don't have the good elements in your company, the human capital is key. And it's even more key now in Europe, where we've got a competition for number of skills. So it's really, really something that's really interesting to see at the moment, and to see how the companies try to answer to this. To say, okay, we assume we understand the message, and we want to take part within the goodwill. We want to build a more positive message and to act positively as well on the territory. So we are discussing currently in France about a new element, entreprise à mission, it's called. So mission, company with a mission, assuming environmental and social responsibility. So it's ESR, but it has been put today in our bill. So it's a bill. It gives, liability to the company and gives us a tool for the state to push for this type of economy. So it's really something interesting. We are able to do it because we are more mature in terms of economy and democracy than a number of parts of the world. It's true, but the transition is really something that will occur as well, maybe quicker than in Europe, in your country, because you have to face climate change elements and consequences. So the gas, I don't know the future of gas. I don't want to be scared for your company, but in France, we just vote to get a carbon neutral country within 2050. So it's in 30 years. In 30 years. So in terms of investment companies, in terms of land occupation and organization, important, and the impact on democracy, we see that we've got a number of challenges that now are occurring in Europe, and you will have to face sooner or later in Latin America. So that's the element for us which is really interesting, is how you build this transition, because we see that this new carbon economy that we have to build, there is a role and a liability, and I assume the word liability for companies. They have a role to play. They have to take responsibility for finding and promote solutions, because they are the one doing innovations, investing in R&D. So it's something really important, and where we play a role as ADEME to try to connect new startups, big companies, and to finance for the state, French state, the innovation. So we've got a huge program of billions of euros where we try to build demonstrators, like technological ones, plus more organizational ones. So it's something really interesting, this transition aspect. So the picture I want to share with you this morning, it's okay, we have now, I think, a moment where the companies, and we saw like a number of, let's say, people, if you look at what happened in US, in big companies, a big corporation movement, so you saw a number of companies which are trying to take liability and responsibility for the change. And I will finish on the local aspect. It has been said in your presentation. The fact that if you want to empower people and give solutions as well to the people, to the land, to citizens and democracy, you have to pay back the price of economical life on your territory. The PIMB approach that you have to share. And we finance a number of projects in the wind farms, solar farms, biogas, where we see people being against, because you know we've got a number of trucks for the gas, for example. You have to bring farming waste, so it brings new trucks. People say, no, we don't want trucks. We want to get clean energy, but we don't want trucks. So they don't care about the way it's built. So you have to build this acceptability, as we say in French, acceptability. Windmills, I know it's a tricky issue in this region, but still, we try to see the way people are accepting windmills. You've got people against. In Europe, it's a huge issue. In France, in Germany. And we have to assume a transition for energy. So windmills are a key element of the ecological and energy transition in this continent. If we don't have windmills, we may have difficulties to reach our goals, and the involvement you take as politicians, as bill, as law, as international agreement. But we've got locally resistance, so we have to find solutions to be sure that you are able to build windmills around you. So what we do, what we promote, is sharing. You ask people, okay, look, we plan to get 10 windmills there. It will cost such. We offer you to finance it at 30%. You will have the money because you pay at one stage. It creates wealth. You will be like shareholder and stakeholders, and this we see that it really helps us to build this acceptability. So it's something that we have to encourage and find it's our role to find the finance to go towards this type of project, and reducing as well, assuming that people, they don't want anymore like huge infrastructure. And you see that they don't want this. They just want more smaller approach. So it's a big, small is beautiful. We are really there in a number of elements in Europe. So we have to, I think, really surf on these waves to try to build this transition economy and society with the impact we've got on democracy. And I think it's really important because even in Europe, and we've got elections, we had elections in the European Parliament a few months ago, and we see that democracy is something like really weak still and fragile. We have to be really careful to this message, and the element of democracy and the transition is a key element. We see that a number of countries, and you look around, Australia, for example, Canada. Today, you've got election coming soon, I think this weekend in Canada. One of the key elements of the campaign is the ecological transition. The carbon aspect, carbon price, carbon tax. We had riots in this country a few months ago based on carbon tax. So you see that all the elements of the ecological transition, it's not we can promote it, we can explain it, but when you enter into it, it's such a radical change, so you have to be really, really extremely careful with the democratic approach. And if you don't share, if you don't explain, if you don't empower people to take part in this change, I'm sure we will go in the wall, as we say in French. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leroy, for bringing us your perspective as a public sector driving this ecological transition. That is something that we've been talking since yesterday, but now we have the perspective of a government. And now we're gonna switch again, and I will bring you towards, we will travel to Ecuador, and please, I would like to show probably with the technical people if they are able to play the YouTube video, and we will show this video from Fundación Futuro. This is a corporate foundation in Ecuador, and it's owned by a group called Futuro, and they are in the business of tourism and insurance. So if we are ready, we can play the video.
We all have a carbon footprint created by the greenhouse gases we generate in performing everyday human activities. Counterintuitive though it may be, travel is responsible for 8% of those carbon emissions and is therefore a main contributor to climate change. And yet, travel is one of the most transformative of human experiences, one that allows you to grow, learn, discover, and dream. It's a dilemma faced by every environmentally conscious traveler. But there is another way. Welcome to the Ecuadorian Chico bioregion, a biodiversity hotspot and a UNESCO biosphere reserve that is currently under threat.
In Ecuador, the Chocó is the geographical site that merges, that combines the richness of the Andes and the richness of the coast. And the combination of these two ecosystems has made the Ecuadorian Chocó an ecoregion that is absolutely exceptional in terms of the numbers of species, and of course that need to be protected. The Ecuadorian Chocó is highly threatened because although it's not a densely populated region, but it's populated all the way through. So the temptation to change this valuable ecosystem into productive areas is permanently there. But then in addition to that, we have an enormous threat that is global, and that is the climate crisis.
Some parts of the Chocó have already been salvaged with spectacular results.
Bueno, mi vida antes era totalmente diferente porque yo talaba, cazaba. Antes las mariposas para mí eran plagas porque dañaban mis cultivos. Ahora trabajando en este lugar no. Ahora ya las veo de otra manera, ahora las cuido, las protejo. Porque a través de cuidarle, de proteger ese animalito, gano mi dinero. Ahora me lo gano cuidando las mariposas y enseñándole al huésped el impacto que tienen las mariposas en la naturaleza.
Nixon's story gives us hope. But there is still so much more to be done. How about tackling two problems at once? Join us at Metropolitan Touring and our fight to regenerate and care for the Chico rainforest, while also offsetting the carbon footprint you leave during your travels. The goal is to go from approximately 6,000 to over 34,000 acres of protected forest land in the Ecuadorian Chico, equaling the size of over 25,000 football fields. The initiative will create important biological corridors, allowing for the migration of species, proper mating, and optimal foraging.
Isolated areas do not have a future. We need to have a real corridor, not just in the map. It has to be a corridor where people participate, where the community is involved, when every individual knows that the basis of the future is that ecosystem.
At Metropolitan Touring, we're following an internationally certified process to measure the precise amount of carbon emissions generated by each of our explorers traveling in Ecuador. We then assign it a monetary value, which we use to offset their carbon footprint. All of the funds raised through this process go directly towards the expansion and protection of forests in the incredibly diverse region of the Andean Chico. This is so much more than just a way to cancel out your carbon footprint. It is a conservation project with a lasting impact that is kind to biodiversity, kind to the earth, and kind to people. Join us in making sure that the only footprint you leave is a positive one.
So we selected this case because it's a case where a company in Ecuador created a financial system for climate change. So this is what I asked Carolina to explain, and there is a short video. We have selected the part where she tells us how this works with her group of companies and the corporate foundation that you saw in this video. So if we can play the video where she is speaking, it would be great. The other video.
Concrete way, What I'm trying to say is that from one side, the way we work is in some areas we work very top-down, where we design some strategies at the national, subnational level, and then we implement that. But we also work from the bottom up, like leveraging or providing support to local processes that have already been in the territory. So concretely, from one side, we own a private reserve of 2,500 hectares in one of the most biodiverse areas of the world. Within those 2,500 hectares, we have a lodge. That lodge means a big, big investment from one of our companies, Metropolitan Touring, that needs to be protected as an investment. As an ecotourism, as an ecotourism company, we hire local people. We are making constant improvement in our in our processes in order to be more sustainable. We try to buy local as much as possible. We dynamize the economy locally, that from within our area. But as well, what we come to realize is that because of climate change, what's happening is the most of the protected areas in the world are at danger. Why? Because species within private reserve are migrating outside those areas due to climate change. So what we need to do is our investment of our lodge is not safe if the forest is not protected in the very long run. So the only way to ensure that is from one side to work in sustainable land use around our private reserve, and then to build ecological corridors in altitude so species can migrate in the long run. So this is what we're doing and why we're doing. So the company is responsible for their carbon emissions. They make their effort internally to reduce those carbon emissions. And the portion of the emissions that they cannot reduce, they are compensated through Fundación Futuro. That we receive those funds. We have an internal price of carbon for our companies. We receive those funds in a trust fund, and we reinvest in conservation and restoration of the areas surrounding our private reserve and in the corridors. How that it means, it's a financial mechanism to ensure that the land use around the area where we work is sustainable. So one of the examples is investing or paying people who owns other forests around a reserve to protect the forest instead of putting it down. If you have a person that works in unsustainable agricultural practices, what we do is we invest in the restoration of the area, and we change practices to an agroecological model. In that order, they can have agriculture, but in a more sustainable way.
Okay, thank you, Carolina. I think she's following us through streaming. So thank you so much for this video and for this experience, which sounds very unique and very, very specific on a company taking the lead of protecting a big amount of territory with a great biodiversity, which benefits all of us. So now we're opening the floor to your questions and your comments or maybe ideas. So please feel free to take the microphone and speak. So maybe we can raise make a question for the floor, for the audience. And this question, well, you can bring other questions as well, but first idea that comes to my mind is, what do you think about the challenges that companies face in your territories in order to change them?
What do we think of the challenges? Well, we have lots of challenges because the territories have so many aspects we have to take care. For us, we have a very strong line in education Specifically, we are investing in educating the teachers and the school directors so that they can qualify better and have a better quality of education in the region. I guess that's the most important way that we can help these institutions to change. This is one of the challenges we've assumed. I don't know if you have.
We have the same debate at the moment in France about education, because as you ask a question regarding companies, and I will come back to it later on, but to combine and to see that wherever you are in terms of development, you have to teach again and again, and for us it's a transition. We have to teach pupils, students, and not only in green, let's say in the green studies. It's for all of them. We have to teach them the world of tomorrow based on climate changes, scarcity of resources, problems potentially speaking with food. So you have to start to address messages, not to scare people. That's where it's really interesting, and it's not easy. You could paint something in black saying, look, the future is really dark. That's the end. It's not first the role of the state, and it's not what we are fighting for. But you have to assume that the world will be different wherever you live. And you see the speech about the climate change effects already in this part of Ecuador, and we have the same in Europe. Netherlands, you have to assume that in 50 years you will have a huge sea rise levels. And the way you cope with it, the way you build and the way you keep democracy. This is for, you know, the holistic approach. For companies, what we have to avoid, and I think it's really interesting to speak about it now, it's what we called greenwashing. We cannot continue as we do today, even if you compensate. Even if you compensate. You know, compensation is really a rich approach. It's interesting, and I'm sure that we may have difficulties in the future with the pure compensation that it stands today. You cannot only, for example, the situation with Ecuador. Basically, people are paying to go and explore. So basically, in holidays in Ecuador, and you have to find a way to protect an area where people are coming for leisure. It starts to be complicated to say people you cannot really develop, because we've got people coming from all over the world to your district because it's beautiful, and they want to keep it nice. So this is really something on which you have to be really careful. And compensation should not become a kind of right for the rich to travel, to eat bio, or to drive a Tesla. It's not this, the compensation. Now compensation has to be read and promoted as a way of development, the way we have to. There is money. You've got money in Europe, you've got money in North America for people traveling to nice and beautiful landscape where they want to keep it as a picture. We know it in France because we are one of the big countries for tourism. And we've got the same debate. We are doing this currently in ADEME. What is the future of tourism? Sustainable tourism, what does it mean? What does it mean when you've got a discussion in Amsterdam where the city is basically destroyed by tourism. But it's an important part of our economy, and you've got people traveling to learn, and I think it's important in terms of, you have to build understandings, and if we want to live all together, we have to know each other, and I think traveling is part of the solution to know each other. But we have to assume there is side effects, and really bad side effects. Traveling with the cost of air transport, or shipping, cruise. We've got the cruise, look at what happened in Venice this summer. So it's something that has to be really taken into consideration, that compensation and the way rich part of the world are maybe buying the right to see nice natural sites. we have to be careful to this because it doesn't make empowerment, it doesn't build acceptability, it brings only a new market, and we have to be, I think, careful to this. It's one element. And the key aspect of the greenwashing, if we want to restore confidence between citizens and companies, the greenwashing is really one really tricky element. If we continue to say, okay, we build less packaging, or we've got new packaging, but this packaging is not recyclable, you cannot reuse it, we don't know the composition, so we cannot, and it's a new waste, a new type of waste, but it's green labeled, I think we are in trouble. The same for new energies and new type of elements. So it's something that in France we see the start of a big change. Consumption is reducing we are not in a discussion, and the government is not pushing for a décroissance, in English it's degrowth. So we are not pushing for this, but we see it. We see it in our daily consumption. Figures are showing it. So we saw that people are starting to understand and change. So it's really interesting, and we have to avoid the fact that they are abused by greenwashing. And that's the role of the state to make it clear, labeling clear, sanctions if people are lying to consumers, to avoid this issue, because the transition is to be done in confidence.
You know, innovation's often thought of in technological terms, or sometimes like with startups and so on. But actually there's a concept called social innovation, which refers to innovating in ways of governance and the ways of doing things in social organization and so on. And just like companies need to have processes of continuous improvement, so do public sector organizations, actually. One of the real barriers to change is public sector organizations are sometimes slower to adapt, and sometimes they're less flexible in how they do things. One example of this actually is with land acquisition and resettlement. Actually, with big projects, one of the biggest impacts created for local people and for impacts on territory is actually land acquisition and the need for resettling people. It's often done really badly and in ways that is a severe impact on their human rights and their ways of living and so on. So one of the urgent needs for the future is doing that in a better way. Actually, if you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, the whole idea here is to increase equity for people and to increase the level of access to services and electricity and energy and water and health services and education and so on. But to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, many more big projects will be required in the developing world especially, and that will be a major impact on requirement for land acquisition and for future resettlement. So it's imperative that we learn how to do resettlement in a way that's consistent with people's human rights and that does not make them worse off like being resettled in the past has done. Now, for public sector organizations, they generally have charters with fixed rates of compensation and fixed procedures which are not in touch with the reality of the real negative experience. You know, place, being attached to place and having a sense of home and connection to where you are is a really important part of being human. So to be resettled is a huge shock. And it's such a shock in every dimension, and it disrupts every aspect of life. Multi-dimensional shock it's how it's often described as. So it's quite important that the ways in which public sector organizations manage their land acquisition, and quite often they resort to a concept called expropriation, which means basically forcibly taking the land away from people. This is completely demoralizing and debilitating of people who are treated that way. So part of the ways in which I get companies and projects and public sector organizations to think is empathy is an analytical concept. You have to think what it would be like if it happened to you. And when you use empathy as a way of trying to understand what the impacts to you would be, then it helps you understand what the impacts to someone else would be. So I really promote the notion of empathy, understanding what it's like for others, as an analytical tool to help work out what are the issues, what's involved, and how we need to improve the way things are done. And change in public sector organisation is a really important thing to be done for going forward into the future.
Any reactions from the floor? Any comments? Okay.
Yes, I have a question for Claudia. So I understand that you, in your company, you decided to consider young people's needs, and you decided to help them to raise their voice, which is very good, I think. But what I don't understand, it's how did it change, or how did it impact your business? How do you work on this? How will you change your business model? Because when we talk about young people, we also talk about their future. So how do you consider this sustainable development changes into, yeah?
Well, it impacts because when you have youth constructing and working for peace in the territory, that makes it very, I mean, that's strategic for the company. If you have conflict in the territory, you cannot sell gas, you cannot have the pay of the gas, you have more problems in the communities to move in between communities. So the youth has more opportunities because we are also helping up with the entrepreneurship. So they actually have more opportunities, and they learn how to speak to the local institutions in the frame of democracy. Because what happens with public services is that, and you were speaking of Afghanistan, the type of protest communities usually have is they have a problem and they will stop the roads, they will stop the companies, the office, or they will, fortunately in Colombia where we don't have recent bombings, but all of this happens in the territories. So what we teach is which is the way how you can express your needs and how we can get to agree for solutions for the territory. It not only helps our company, but helps everything, all of the companies. And when I started, I said that we are a Colombian company from the coast, and we feel co-responsible for what happens in the company. The company has 50 years of existence in the territory, and if you see the marketing analyzing, we have very good favorability from the community, but the reality is very tough: violence, risk, the war. So these are difficulties to manage any business and to live freely and safe.
There was another question there.
Firstly, thank you for sharing 3 very different perspectives when it comes to social responsibility. Thank you for sharing your expertise. My question, so many of us are students, many of us are also foreign students from ESX School of Management specifically. My question is, since we are students who want to create value-added interactions, whatever it may mean to us as individuals, based on your expertise and experience, what are the concrete actions or discussions that you would want us to have, both within France or internationally? And what other advice would you give us to identify problems that have not been raised up or potential issues that could be discussed?
Great question. Thank you so much. So, please.
I think the concrete actions you can do, basically, because you are the one that will be in a position to take actions soon. It's first, don't look at the rules of the 80s, 90s, and 2000. I don't know, you are business school students, so you have like added value words, you want to get a return on investment, so forget it. Forget the figures. Forget 8, 10, 11. Go to 3, 4, 5. And ensure like social responsibility, empowerment, all this sharing, all these new words that have been kicked out of all your books for too many years. That needs to be done and needs to be changed. So you are the one that should question your teachers. But okay, does this recipe still okay for the world that we are speaking about neutral carbon? The world we are speaking about, climate change, looking at the figures given by the IPCC or the biodiversity panel. That's the world. That's what you can do, is to check, to ensure the trade-off of old recipes with the futures you need to build. That's it. And question what you are being taught, about all these new elements. I think it's my feeling when I'm a former member of parliament. So I've been trying to push for climate change issues and everything. So we succeeded in France in 2015. But still, it has been signed in Paris Agreement, and my own country, we are already out of the trajectories we signed for. So you see all these elements, and you are the new, let's say, the new workers of the future. So you need to challenge this. You cannot accept that we decide for you, basically, and you cannot accept, and this is concrete, just question, does your education is valid for the future that needs to be built? It's not to be scared and to scare you that I'm saying this. You have a future, but we need solutions. And honestly, when you look at technological innovation, we have a huge and worldwide companies. What we see in innovation, we don't see innovation like disruptive innovation in these companies. For example, we know it. For example, it's not Monsanto or Bayer that will bring solutions for the crop sciences. We know this. We know it for the pharmaceutical industry. Sanofi, they decided to close a number of laboratories, internal laboratories, to look around and to look at the external startups world where the innovation is. And that's the same today for you. Don't wait. My generation, even if I'm, I think, one of the youngest of the panel, we are a transition generation. But you are the one that will have to build, solution. The new students, the new engineers, the new workers, all of you. Change will occur more rapidly than we believe. And we've got discussion, change in 2030, 40. Europe will change radically in the next 20 years. And when I look at the education aspects, I'm not sure we are preparing people saying, okay, you will have to question yourself. We may not have all the answers at the moment. It's true. But the fact that we try to teach people to question, to keep, as we say in French, the critical spirit is something really important. So it's a concrete action that I really recommend you. It's keep and build a critical aspect to challenge and question everything, because everything needs to be rethink. If we want to build a new world where we speak about democracy, biodiversity, growth, and all these aspects need to be rethink.
Okay, you said you were foreigners, so I tell you, go back to your country. Go back. Probably you're tempted to stay here a year and work and gain the experience. But if you ask us what you have to address, what's your voice, go to your country again, and probably you're going to be frustrated, because in those regions, at least in Colombia, if you go one of those regions, young people are speaking to access for education or health, or they're asking for basic human rights that in Europe, you don't even think of them. Young people are asking for water, to have water facilities in some of these areas. So what I say is, if you're privileged enough to have this education, you come back to your territories and you understand why those things that happen in Europe are not happening here. And probably you're going to find out there's lots of corruption, there's not a well-structured democracy, and start working there, because for you it's going to be easy to understand, but large part of the community is immersed in solving basic needs, getting just an opportunity for a minimum wage job, and in the same Colombia trying to migrate or go out from the territory. So then if the young people don't find those opportunities in the territory, nothing is going to happen. We need the young people to stay, and that's part of our job. Our idea is make them stay and work, because those territories are beautiful. I mean, they have lots of resources, things that can be done, but they don't happen because they haven't got the courage or the education to do it.
It's a very good question. You know, I'm the sort of person who, when 2 or 3 dot points are wanted, I'll give 15 or 25. What I would say here is, the most important thing is to maintain your motivation, enthusiasm, optimism, but at the same time, don't underestimate the severity of the challenge. Simplistic you know, everything is more complex than simplistic solutions lead to. So, as a good scholar, explore the complexity, and complexity is never overwhelmingly complex when you start unraveling the different components. So beware of simplistic solutions and maintain your motivation.
I will tell you the story of the best professor we had when I was in university. And he taught us classes with a newspaper. And we were very amazed. And his class was not mandatory, although the class was full. And one day we asked him, how do you do it to have us so committed to you? And how did you gather all these stories, all real stories? And he told us that his father said, I will not give you any gifts, but you will travel where things are happening. So this might be difficult or easy. It depends on your situation, where you are based. If you are far away, this could be probably harder. But try to go there where things are going on and talk to people and ask them what do they think about the reality they are living. Don't stay with your own ideas, but try to build a new idea from their insights. And that's my recommendation for you. Let's see if there's someone else that wants to share insights and maybe other experience. Okay, so do you want to go around for a final remark, a final conclusion, or you're fine? Okay, so thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to learn together with this great group of panelists and with you about the power of territories to change companies and the power of companies to change territories. Okay, have a great